In his long journey of searching for truth and liberation, the Buddha once compared following the noble path to entering a dark room with a lamp. This saying contains a profound truth, reflecting the journey from ignorance to enlightenment. When the darkness of suffering and sorrow covers the mind, only the light of wisdom can dispel all darkness, leading people to the shore of peace. The story of the Buddha's path to enlightenment begins with a difficult journey. From the time he was a prince living in luxury and comfort, until he realized the truth about suffering and started the challenging path of practice. It was a journey of renunciation, facing difficulties, and finally, the light of enlightenment shone everywhere, bringing hope and peace to millions worldwide. And today, let's learn more about the Buddha's path to enlightenment through this video. Let the light from his story guide us, helping us discover the valuable lessons he left for humanity. The story begins, around the 6th century BC, in the city of Kapilavastu near the border between Nepal and India today. The kingdom of King Siddhartha and Queen Maya, of the Sakya clan, one of the most powerful families in the region. Legend has it that, before giving birth to the prince, in a dream, Queen Maya saw a white elephant with 6 tusks walking to her right. Then, she became pregnant and gave birth to a prince, named Siddhartha. After giving birth to the prince for 8 days, Queen Maya passed away, and the whole country was deeply saddened. One day, King Siddhartha invited famous teachers to predict the future of the prince. Among them, the prophet Asita predicted that the prince would become an almighty ruler of both the human and heavenly realms if he chose the path of asceticism, or would become a great king if he chose the secular path. The prophet's words made the king very troubled because the king wanted the prince to be the successor to expand the territory, instead of becoming a monk, which affected the way the king raised the prince later. Because he did not want his son to become a monk, the king found a very beautiful girl to be the prince's wife and tried to hide all the sufferings of life from his sight. One day, out of curiosity, the prince secretly left the palace to explore the outside world but did not know that this was the turning point that would change his life forever. The prince saw 4 scenes that he had never seen before: an old and weak person, a sick person, a dead person, and an ascetic monk. Each scene left a deep impression on him, stirring up questions about the true meaning of life and suffering. One night, the prince decided to give up his luxurious life and leave the palace to find answers about the path to liberation for himself. He said goodbye to his wife and children, left in the dark, and began his arduous journey of practice. The prince sought out 2 famous teachers, Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta, to learn. Under their guidance, the prince attained the highest levels of meditation but still did not feel satisfied. He realized that these meditation methods did not help him achieve complete liberation, so he decided to leave to find a new path to attain enlightenment. After leaving the 2 teachers, Prince Siddhartha decided to practice asceticism, thinking that it was the way to attain enlightenment. He practiced fasting, eating only 1 sesame seed a day for 7 years. His body was so thin that it was only skin and bones, so weak that he could barely stand up. Until one day, he was meditating in a cemetery and suddenly realized that the path of asceticism was the wrong path. He realized that the body and mind were one inseparable entity, that the peace of the body was related to the peace of the mind, and that torturing the body was also torturing the mind. The prince's memory returned to his youth when he was only 9 years old, and he sat quietly under a jujube tree on the first plowing day of the year. The feeling at that time was a feeling of peace, making people unusually alert and clear-headed. He also remembered the first days of meditating with the famous teacher Alara Kalama, when he also felt the peace that meditation brought. These places were not related to the 5 kinds of sensual pleasures of money, beauty, or status. On the contrary, peace can nourish the body and soul so that each person has enough strength to go far on the path of enlightenment. Self-torture in the jungle is like enjoying pleasures in the palace, neither can help one to be liberated. To find the truth, he realized that he had to follow the middle path, not to indulge too much and not to be too ascetic. He decided to abandon the path of asceticism, leave the cave, and moved to the cool forest near the river to practice. Sitting under the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha concentrated all his concentration and introspected. He firmly vowed that if he did not attain enlightenment, even if he had to die here, he would not leave this place. During his meditation under the Bodhi tree, Prince Siddhartha had to face countless disturbances from the devil King Mara. From temptations of power and lust, to threats of fear and violence. Mara and his army tried to break the prince's concentration with illusions and temptations, but he remained steadfast and unshaken. After many nights, overcoming all the temptations, illusions, and challenges of the devil king, he understood the nature of suffering, its cause, and the path to escape from suffering. Finally, on the full moon night of Vesak, after 49 days of meditation, Prince Siddhartha attained enlightenment and became the Buddha. He realized the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path as the path to liberation from samsara. After the Buddha attained enlightenment, he began to spread his teachings throughout northern India. The ideas of compassion, cause and effect, and the Noble Eightfold Path attracted many people, especially the poor, who sought liberation from suffering. Buddhism became a flourishing religion in India. King Ashoka, after witnessing the consequences of war, renounced violence and chose the path of Buddhism, helping to spread the religion throughout the lands of India and to neighboring countries. Buddhist monasteries and centers of learning such as Nalanda and Vikramashala became centers of knowledge and religion, attracting scholars and followers from all over the world. In the 7th century, Islam began to enter India through the invasions of Muslim armies from Central Asia and the Middle East. Muslim leaders, with the belief in conquering and spreading Islam, began to penetrate deep into Indian territory, bringing with them a new culture and religion. One of the first Muslim invasions of India was led by the general Muhammad bin Qasim in 712. He conquered Sindh, a land in northwestern India. There, bin Qasim imposed Islam and destroyed Buddhist temples and monasteries, marking the beginning of the decline of Buddhism in India. In the 11th century, Mahmud of Ghazni, a Muslim warlord from Afghanistan, made a series of invasions into India. He was famous for destroying Buddhist temples and monasteries, including major centers such as Nalanda. Mahmud not only looted and destroyed them, but also converted many monasteries into Muslim places of worship or completely razed them. One of the most memorable events was the attack by Bakhtiyar Khilji in the late 12th century. Khilji attacked Bihar and completely destroyed Nalanda University, one of the greatest centers of learning in the world at that time. Thousands of Buddhist monks and scholars were killed or driven away, and valuable books and documents were burned for months. This was considered a fatal blow to Buddhism in India. After the invasions and destruction, Buddhism began to decline rapidly in India. Monks were killed or forced to flee to other lands such as Tibet, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Southeast Asia. Monasteries and centers of learning were destroyed or converted into Muslim places of worship. Buddhism, once the dominant religion in India, gradually disappeared and became a minority religion. Muslim leaders focused not only on conquest but also on imposing their religion and culture on the Indian people. Many were forced to convert to Islam, and those who did not comply were often severely persecuted. Buddhist temples and monasteries were not only destroyed but also replaced with mosques, further diminishing the existence of Buddhism. After centuries of invasion and imposition, Buddhism was largely assimilated into Islam or Hinduism. What remained of Buddhism in India was often mixed into local customs or disappeared altogether. Once great Buddhist centers are now in ruins. Although in decline in India, the legacy of Buddhism lives on in neighboring countries. Buddhism continues to thrive in Tibet, China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. In the 20th century, Buddhism began to enjoy a revival in India thanks to conversion movements, but it never regained its former prominence.